once wrote, "For while the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted and how we may triumph is never new, it always must be heard. While the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted and how we may triumph is never new, it always must be heard." Today, as so many generations had before, we gather on our national mall to tell an essential part of our American story, one that has at times been overlooked. We come not just for today, but for all time. President and Mrs. Bush, President Clinton, Vice President Dr. Biden, Chief Justice Roberts, Secretary Skorton, Reverend Butts, distinguished guests, thank you. Thank you for your leadership in making sure this tale is told. We're here in part because of you and because of all those Americans, Civil War vets, the civil rights foot soldiers, the champions of this effort on Capitol Hill, who for more than a century kept the dream of this museum alive. It includes our leaders in Congress, Paul Ryan, Nancy Pelosi. It includes one of my heroes, John Lewis, who, as he has so often, took the torch from those who came before him and brought us past the finish line. It includes the philanthropists, and benefactors, and advisory members who have so generously given not only their money but their time. It includes the Americans who offered up all the family keepsakes tucked away in Grandma's attic. And of course, it includes a man without whose vision and passion and persistence we would not be here today, Mr. Lonnie Bunch. What we can see of this building, the towering glass, the artistry, the metalwork, is surely a sight to behold. But beyond the majesty of the building, what makes this occasion so special is the larger story it contains. Below us, this building reaches down 70 feet. Its roots spreading far wider and deeper than any tree on this mall. And on its lowest level, after you walk past remnants of the slave ship, after you reflect on the immortal declaration that all men are created equal, you can see a block of stone. On top of this stone sits a historical marker, weathered by the ages. And that marker reads, "General Andrew Jackson and Henry Clay spoke from this slave block during the year 1830. I want you to think about this. Consider what this artifact tells us about history, about how it's told, about what can be cast aside. On a stone where day after day, for years, men and women were torn from their spouse or their child, shackled and bound and bought and sold and bid like cattle, on a stone worn down by the tragedy of over 1,000 bare feet. For a long time, the only thing we considered important, the singular thing we once chose to commemorate as history with a plaque, were the unmemorable speeches of two powerful men. And that block, I think, explains why this museum is so necessary. Because that same object, reframed, put in context, tells us so much more. As Americans, we rightfully pass on the tales of the giants who built this country, who led armies into battle, who waged seminal debates in the halls of Congress and the corridors of power. But too often we ignored or forgot the stories of millions upon millions of others who built this nation just as surely, whose humble eloquence, whose calloused hands, whose steady drive helped to create cities, erect industries, build the arsenals of democracy. And so this National Museum helps to tell a richer and fuller story of who we are. It helps us better understand the lives, yes, of the president, but also the slave, the industrialist, but also the porter, the keeper of the status quo, but also the activist seeking to overthrow that status quo, the teacher, or the cook, alongside the statesman. And by knowing this other story, we better understand ourselves and each other. It binds us together. It reaffirms that all of us are American. That African American history is not somehow separate from our larger American story. It's not the underside of the American story. It is central to the American story. That our glory derives not just from our most obvious triumphs, but how we wrested triumph from tragedy, and how we've been able to remake ourselves again and again and again in accordance with our highest ideals. I too am American. Great historian John Hope, who helped to get this museum started, once said, "Good history is a good foundation for a better present and future." He understood the best history doesn't just sit behind a glass case. It helps us to understand what's outside the case. The best history helps us recognize the mistakes that we've made, and the dark corners of the human spirit that we need to guard against. And yes, a clear-eyed view of history can make us uncomfortable. It'll shake us out of familiar narratives. But it is precisely because of that discomfort that we learn and grow and harness our collective power to make this nation more perfect. That's the American story that this museum tells. One of suffering and dilemma, also of hope. Wandering in the wilderness, and then seeing out on the horizon a glimmer of the promised land. It is in this embrace of truth, as best as we can know, in the celebration of the entire American experience, where real patriotism lies. As President Bush just said, a great nation doesn't shy from the truth. It strengthens us. It emboldens us. It should fortify us. It is an act of patriotism to understand where we've been. This museum tells the story of so many patriots. Yes, African Americans have felt the cold weight of shackles and the stinging lash of the field whip, but we've also dared to run north, sing songs from Harriet Tubman's hymn. We've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice. Decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze. Yes, this museum tells a story of people who felt the indignity, small and large humiliations of the whites-only sign, or wept at the side of Emmett Till's coffin, or fell to their knees on shards of stained glass outside the church where 4 little girls died. But it also tells the story of black and white youth sitting alongside each other, straight-backed, so full of dignity, on those lunch counter stools. The story of 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, pigtails, fresh pressed dress, walking that gauntlet to get to school. Tuskegee Airmen, soaring the skies, not just to beat a dictator, but to reaffirm the promise of our democracy and remind us that all of us are created equal. This is the place to understand how protest and love of country don't merely coexist, but inform each other. How men can proudly win the gold for their country, but still insist on raising a black-gloved fist. How we can wear an I Can't Breathe t-shirt and still grieve for fallen police officers. Busy America wearing the razor-sharp uniform of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff belongs alongside the cape of the Godfather of Soul. We have shown the world we can float like butterflies and sting like bees. We can rocket into space like Mae Jemison, steal home like Jackie, rock like Jimmy, stir the pot like Richard Pryor. Or we can be sick and tired of being sick and tired, like Fannie Mae, and still rock steady, like Aretha Franklin. We are large, Walt Whitman told us, containing multitudes. We are large, containing multitudes, full of contradictions. That's America. That's what makes us go. That's what makes us extraordinary. And as is true for America, so is true for the African American experience. We're not a burden on America. We're a stain on America. We're an object of pity or charity for America. We're America. And that's what this museum explains. The fact that our stories have shaped every corner of our culture. The struggles for freedom that took place made our Constitution a real and living document, tested and shaped